this video, I'm doing my September reading wrap up. I read 4 books in September, 2 of them pretty chunky, so lots of reading for me and lots of good reading. I had 2 out of 5 of these books were 5-star reads for me, so a really good reading month overall. The first book that I read, and the first 5-star book that I read, was Geekerella by Ashley Poston. This is a part of a companion series, the first book in a companion series, in which each book is a modern retelling of a fairy tale with like a fandom twist. So this first one obviously is Cinderella, and in this version of Cinderella, our Cinderella is into a series that is very like Star Trek-esque, and her dad created this convention for the show years ago, and she has not been back since he passed away, but this year there's a costume competition that she is hoping to win to help her get away from her evil stepmother. And even though I am not a big Star Trek fan, I loved this book. 5 stars, obviously, I've already mentioned. It was just so fun, and even though this isn't specifically one of my fandoms, it just had all those fandom nerd culture vibes. Honestly, the like feeling and mood of the book for me was very much Hilary Duff's A Cinderella Story, the early 2000s movie. I loved that movie as a kid, and this was kind of like reading it in book form with a bunch of fandom thrown on top. So it was just perfect for me. I thought it was a lot of fun, it was funny, the characters had a lot of depth, even though this could have been a very surface level book since it is so lighthearted. It still had a lot of depth. I thought the romance was fantastic. I thought it employed the traditional tropes that appear in a lot of these types of books very well. None of them were done in an annoying tropey way. And yeah, honestly, just basically no bad notes for this book from me. I really liked it. I wasn't sure if I would. I'm very glad that I did, and I for sure plan to continue with the series. Very excited to see the other retellings. After Geekerella, I read Gallant by V.E. Schwab. And this one I also wasn't super sure going into it, because V.E. Schwab, I've read quite a few of her books now, and they're pretty hit or miss for me. The Near Witch, her first book, I really didn't enjoy at all. I thought it was really boring. I enjoyed the little short story at the end of it more than the book itself. The Darker Shades of Magic series, I really liked the concept, but I never felt like the books quite lived up to the coolness of the concept. They were okay, I didn't dislike them, but they weren't great. But then Vicious and Vengeful, I loved. Those were both like 4 and 5 stars for me. And Addie LaRue, which I read earlier this year, I loved. It was a 5-star read for me. It was my favorite of hers so far. So going into Gallant, I definitely knew that she kind of falls all over the spectrum for me, and I had seen, this one came out a few years ago, that it was not super well received when it came out. The cover is very cool, and there's cool artwork throughout the book, very like dark sort of artwork throughout the book. And that looked cool and interesting, but the reviews I had heard was that like it does not live up to its visuals, and a lot of what I saw is that like people didn't like that it felt like it was for younger readers. But having read the book, I don't really agree with that so much. I didn't find the story boring, certainly not nearly as boring as The Near Witch, and while nothing like mature necessarily happens in the book, it didn't read too young to me. I was interested throughout. I do feel like the ending was a little bit underwhelming. I feel like there was a lot of build up to not very much happening at the end. This book is very much built on mystery, and then it, to me, doesn't do a super great job of answering the questions to those mysteries. But I was engaged throughout the book, and I gave it a 3.5 star. Very middle of the road for me. Would rank it above The Near Witch for sure. Would for sure rank it below Vicious, Vengeful, and Addie LaRue. And would probably even rank it below the Darker Shades of Magic series, but only by like a little bit. So yes, that was my second V.E. Schwab for the year. might be taking a little bit of a break from her for next year. After that, I read The Cerulean by Amy Ewing, and I had basically no expectations going into this one. I did not know much about it. I got this one from a friend who said it was just okay, not bad, not great, and you really don't see it much on like BookTube or anything. And the concept in this one, it's a fantasy series. I thought it was a standalone going into it. It's a series in which there's this society that lives like in space, and their city kind of attaches itself to planets to get its resources, and every however often that the resources run out, they have to move to a new planet. And this is a society built of exclusively women, and in the book, the planet that they are currently attached to is a little bit more similar to our world, but back a couple hundred years. And in the book, in order to break the tether that ties them to their current planet to be able to move on to a new planet, they have to sacrifice someone. And they have a goddess that basically like tells their high priestess when this needs to happen and who needs to be the sacrifice. So our main character has been chosen to be the sacrifice, and the book kind of continues on from there. I rated this one 3 stars. It was definitely an interesting, unique world. It kind of made me think of Herland, the book from the 1920s that I read for a feminism class in college, but I don't remember the author's name. But that is a utopian book that is a society built only of women. And so yeah, there were definitely some like interesting concepts in the book, but I don't know that they were super well explored. The society felt kind of mushy, I guess. Like, in some ways things felt very specific, and in other ways things felt very like, oh, sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's not. I think I'm going to continue with the series. Not anytime soon. I'll probably reread this one at some point and continue on. Because like I said, definitely interesting concepts. I'm intrigued, but I would not say that I think this is like the highest quality writing I've ever read. But it does have a very gorgeous cover. And then finally in September, I read By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult. I went to a book release event for this one with my mom. The previous month we went to a Rainbow Rowell event for her new book, Slow Dance, and then the following month, which Rainbow is probably my second favorite author, the following month we went to this event with Jodi Picoult, who is my mom's favorite author, and she was being interviewed by Rainbow Rowell. So that was very fun. It's been a fun 2 months of bookish stuff. But I had never read a Jodi Picoult book before. I do have 3 sitting on my TBR that I got from a friend. And yeah, upon reading this, wish I had been reading Jodi Picoult for much longer. I wish that I hadn't just now gotten around to one of her books, because this was fantastic. This was my other 5-star read for the month. This is historical fiction. It's got 2 timelines, very common for Jodi Picoult books. One that takes place in the present day and one that takes place in the past. And the storyline in the past follows the real-life figure Amelia Bassano, who some people theorize may have written some of the plays credited to William Shakespeare. Jodi makes the argument in this book that Amelia could not publish under her own name as a woman at the time, and instead sold her work to William Shakespeare for him to put his name on. And the idea is that actually multiple writers did this, but this book just focuses on Amelia. And then in the present day storyline, we follow a fictional descendant of Amelia who has written a play about her ancestor and cannot get it published under her name, and instead has to use the name of a male writer. And I was very surprised after reading it. I went on Goodreads and read some reviews, and pretty much everyone was saying that they liked the modern day storyline better, and that the one in the past was too slow and boring. I could not disagree more. I found the present day storyline a little bit slow and just not as strongly written. I don't know if that's partly because that one wasn't based on a real person, and so the story just kind of isn't as strong. Those chapters are much shorter, So to me, those characters just aren't, we don't get to know them as well. And it's not that I didn't care about the present day storyline, it's just that I cared so much more about Amelia's storyline in the past. I wouldn't get rid of the present day storyline because the reason that's there is to show that this does still happen in the present day. Obviously not as much as it happened in the 1500s, but it does still happen. So I wouldn't get rid of it, but at the same time, I didn't care as much about it, and I didn't think it was quite as strongly written. But yeah, I think Amelia Bassano just had such an interesting life. Obviously, Jodi had to build it up quite a bit. We don't know a lot about people from the 1500s, including William Shakespeare himself, who was much more famous. But we do know the broad strokes, and it seems like she had such an interesting life. And the amount of research that went into this is just astounding. And it put me onto a real Shakespeare kick, which I kind of suspected that it would. And so the day of the event, I actually went out and bought Hamnet, which was popular a few years ago and is about William Shakespeare's wife and his deceased son, Hamnet. And so I'm reading that one next. I'm also rewatching Will, a TNT show from a few years ago that lasted only one season about William Shakespeare. So yeah, this just put me like down a whole rabbit hole. And interestingly enough, Hamnet was one of the things kind of blocking my mind from thinking that William Shakespeare didn't write, at very least, Hamlet. But it does turn out that Amelia Bassano had a daughter who also died before the writing of Hamlet, who was named Odelia, in much the same way that Hamnet is like Hamlet, Odelia is like Ophelia, one of the main female characters from Hamlet. One other small thing that did annoy me in the present day storyline was the use of the miscommunication trope. This is very common in Shakespeare plays, which I think is part of why the trope was used, but I do think it was taken just a little bit too far at the end, and it kind of bugged me. But that's just a random side note that just popped into my head. So yes, could not recommend this one enough. I really loved it. But that was it for all of the books that I read in September. It was just an excellent reading month for me. Let me know down below if you've picked up Jodi Picoult's new book and what you've been reading in September. I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.